Welcome to Project Lekut Siches. We will be learning today Sicha Beis of Parshas Kisavai in Chelek Yudalid, page 99. The Sicha here is a Sicha on the last few Rashis of this week's Parsha. I strongly suggest before you learn the Sicha, take out a Chumash, take a look at the last 8 psukim of the Parsha and at the Rashis there, and then you'll understand and enjoy the Sicha much more. B'siyam as-sedre nemar. Towards the end of the parsha it says, Vayikra Moshe kol Yisrael vayom aleim atem reisem hamasis agdolos. Moshe calls to Yidden and tells them that you've seen the great miracles. And it goes on to talk about different things that happened to Yidden. And then the pasuk says, V'lo nosan Hashem lachem lev ladas v'nayim liros v'aznayim l'shmoya ad hayom hazeh. And you didn't have, the Eibusha didn't give you a heart to understand, and eyes to see, and ears to hear, or to listen until today. Umaitik Rashi min HaKosav v'nosna Hashem lachem leiv ladas. Umefarish, and Rashi explains in these words as follows: Lahakir es chazdei HaKadosh Baruch Hu v'lidovik by. What you were lacking until now is you didn't recognize the Eibusha's kindness, and you didn't attach, you didn't connect to Hashem, dveikus. So the Rebbe has the following questions on this Rashi. Aleph number 1, Minole le Rashi shaladas toichna shnei inyanim. How does Rashi know that the word ladas in the pasuk includes 2 details? Aleph, lahakes chazdei kadosh baruch hu, recognizing Hashem's kindness, and beis, v'lidavik by, and also to connect to Hashem. How do we know that it includes these 2 things? That's one question. Second question, beis, lama maitik gamas atevais v'leinosan Hashem lochem. Why when Rashi explains the words leiv ladas, what ladas entails, does Rashi also bring from the pasuk the words v'leinosan Hashem lochem? Hareinu mefarish ala leiv ladas. He's only explaining the words leiv ladas. Lahakir es chazdei kadosh baruch hu chulu. Gimel, the third question, b'mashakasa v'leinosan ladas, when it says that the Eibusha didn't give you this ability, this understanding, it refers to understanding and appreciating what was mentioned before, the miracles and wonders that Yidden experienced coming out of Mitzrayim and being in the Midbar. Why is the term that Rashi uses that it's the kindness of the Eibshter? A miracle and kindness are 2 different things. There's a kindness that the Eibusha gives without any miracle. And on the other hand, not every miracle performed is for the purpose of kindness. For example, you have the 10 makkos that are for the purpose of punishing the Mitzrayim. It's not an inyan of chesed. So the pasuk clearly speaks about masais, oisais, moivsim, miracles, and Rashi speaks about chazdei HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Why does Rashi do that? This is the first Rashi on this subject, which the Rebbe discusses. Now the Rebbe goes on weiter to the next psukim. Achakach maitik Rashi es atevais ad hayom hazeh. That the Eibusha hasn't given you this recognition until today. What exactly is this day that we're speaking about? Umefarish, Rashi explains as follows: Shamaiti, I heard, Shoisa hayom shenasa Moshe sefer Torah levnei Levi. This day is the day that Moshe Rabbeinu wrote and gave a sefer Torah to Bnei Levi. As it says in Parshas Vayelech, Vayitna lakayin b'nei Levi, that Moshe wrote a sefer Torah and gave it to Bnei Levi. And what happened? Bo kol Yisrael lefnei Moshe v'amru loi. All Yidden came to Moshe Rabbeinu and said to him, Moshe Rabbeinu, afanu amadnu b'sinai v'kibalnu sat-Torah v'nitna lanu. We were also there at Har Sinai. We also received the Torah. It was given to us. Why are you giving a Torah and placing your shevet in control of the Torah? And then the Leviim are going to tell us on a day tomorrow, the Torah was not given to you. The Torah was only given to us. And Moshe was very happy when he heard this. On this complaint that the Yidden had. And therefore Moshe Rabbeinu said to the Yidden, oh, today you've become a nation. Which means, it's today that I understood that you want to attach and be one with the Eibishter, and you desire to be one with the Eibishter, as Moshe Rabbeinu saw by the fact that they desire to have the Torah just like the Leviim did. So that's what's special about Hayom Hazeh, where Moshe Rabbeinu said, today I see that you recognize the kindness of the Eibishter, and today you want to be connected to the Eibishter. So the Rebbe says, we have a question on this Rashi here. Habitui ad Hayom Hazeh. The expression that the pasuk here uses, ad Hayom Hazeh, until today. Nimtze kvar kam b'pamim b'Teirah. It's mentioned a few times in Teirah. Al kein shema ir be'shava ad Hayom Hazeh. Al kein la yechel b'nei Yisrael as gid anosha ad Hayom Hazeh. V'chein b'siyim at Teirah. Ne'amar, at the end of the Teirah, what does it say? V'lo yada ishas k'vurasai ad Hayom Hazeh. Nobody knew when Moshe Rabbeinu is buried until today. Ubekulam pidish ad v'ad b'chlal. The meaning of ad in all of these cases means until this day, including this day. Shu kail games Hayom Hazeh includes this day as well. Umayshna kan, that is, what's the difference over here? Shepirish Rashi ad v'lo ad b'chlal, that we're talking about until today, but not including today. Today I actually understand that you're connected to the Eibishter. You're one with the Eibishter. So what changes over here that Rashi is saying, the pshat and the pasuk, that ad Hayom Hazeh means until today, but not including today. Ad v'lo ad b'chlal. Ubefrat Rashi makdem umadgish the pirush zeh rak shamaiti. Rashi says that this is a pshat that he doesn't have a source for it. He heard this pshat. He heard this pshat from his teachers. So that's the first general question on this Rashi. The pshat here in the pasuk is going to be until today, not including today. Different than everywhere else in the Torah. Then there are the following questions in Rashi. Aleph, B'tainas b'nei Yisrael nemar. The complaint that Yidden have, what are they saying to Moshe Rabbeinu? We kibalnu es ha-Torah. We also received the Torah, v'nitna lanu, and it was given to us. It should have been the opposite. B'tchila nitna lanu. First, Yidden should be saying that the Torah was given to us. And only afterwards do they say that we received it. First you give and then you receive. Why does Rashi say it the other way around? Beis, the next question here is Hataina. What's the Yidden's complaint? Why are you placing the Bnei Levi in control of this Torah? Mashma, so this expression of mashlit, that you're putting them in control, so it seems that the Yidden are not complaining that they don't have the Torah is shaykh to all Yidden. Moshe Rabbeinu is giving the Bnei Levi an advantage and a control over it. That's what it seems from this word in Rashi. But if you look at the continuation of Rashi's words, what was the Yidden's concern? That the Leviim are going to say to the Yidden that the Torah wasn't given to you. So if so, the complaint of Yidden should have been much stronger. Why are you giving the Torah away? You're giving it away to your Shevet. That's the complaint they're going to be having as Rashi continues. So why does Rashi use the term mashlet? What's the actual cause of the whole concern? The fact that Moshe Rabbeinu writes a Torah and gives it to Bnei Levi. So the right expression to be used over here is not to mashlet, but why are you giving? Why are you giving a Torah only to Bnei Levi? What's this term that Rashi uses here, mashlet, that you're putting them in control? Gimel, another question is, in the order of the way things happen, it would have been more fitting to say, v'yomru, that the Yidden's complaint is that the Leviim are going to say, lanu chulu, lanu nitna, the Torah is given to us, umizaraya shalei lechem nitna. And that is the proof that it's not given to you. Since Moshe Rabbeinu wrote for us a Torah, so that's the reason why we now say that it's not given to you. That's the right order, the way it should be written. But Rashi says it the other way around, that the Yidden are complaining that the Leviim are going to say it wasn't given to you, it was given to us. Why does Rashi write it the other way around? The Rebbe goes on to the next Rashi here in this parsha. Then the Torah continues and says, I guided you around in the middle for 40 years. And then you arrived to this location, right outside there, it's Yisrael. And then Sichon came out to fight with you. And Vanak came, you fought him away, or fought him back. And you took his land, you conquered his land. And now Moshe Rabbeinu is warning Yidden that they should keep the bris. What's the pshat here? You arrived at this place. Now you see yourself with greatness and honor. Do not rebel against the Eibishter, and don't have your heart feel high and be a balgaiva. And you should continue keeping the bris of the Torah. That's Rashi's pshat. So here again, the Rebbe has a few questions on what's Rashi saying here. So the first and basic question is Aleph, Ma kosher b'vetavoy ala mokem hazeh sherashi balitaretz al de pirushe ata atem roi matzvachim chulu. What's b'chlal not understood in these words, and you arrive to this place that Rashi has to explain something. Beis le'idach b'chol aksuvim shalofnei zeh medube b'nissim shir lefnei Yisrael. In all the psukim before, it talks about nissim that happened to Yidden. V'chein la'alom b'kosav zeh atzmai. In this pasuk itself, it continues. Mamshech b'sipur anitzachon anisi b'milchemes seichen oy v'oig. It talks about the miraculous victory over Sichen and Oig. Ve'ich yitochen shebiyachad maskaras anisim shero b'nei Yisrael. So how is it possible that right here, when we're mentioning all these great miracles that happened to Yidden, shayidei nisim v'yaminu ba'avai v'chayetze v'zeh? And when miracles happen, what does that bring about? V'yaminu, it brings about, it strengthens your emunah in the Eibishter, as we see it as it happened after Kriyas Yamsuf. So Rashi says, why are we saying all of this? Because this is all explaining that we have to warn Yidden that they shouldn't rebel against Hashem. Really? If Yidden see all these nisim, this is a reason to warn them that they shouldn't rebel against Hashem? Gimel, another question here is, Madua rak ato atem roim atzchem begdulu v'chavit chulu yoser mimashero atzmon b'chol zman hayesim b'midbar. Why is Rashi saying that it's right now, here, after the victory against Sichen v'oig, that Yidden see themselves with greatness and honor, more than the rest of the time when they were in the midbar? Yidden experienced the Kriyas Yamsuf, Yidden were in the midbar and saw miracles every day. Yidden didn't see themselves then with greatness and honor. What happened now that Rashi is saying ato? Something changed here and now. Dalit, another question. Ma'im beizan yonim the gdula v'chavit. What are the two things Rashi mentions here? Greatness and honor. What are they? Dalit. The Rebbe goes on weiter and quotes the continuation of this Rashi. Achakach mamshech Rashi umefarish. Now Rashi comes and explains Hanemar gimel psukim lefnei. So something that goes back to what we began the sicha here with today. 3 psukim earlier, Shkvar Pirshe Shamal Asar, and Rashi already explained it there before, Maisav Khan, and here Rashi adds a second pshat. Davar Acher, a second pshat, and V'leinos Nashem Lechem Leiv Ladas, that until today you don't have a Leiv Ladas. What does this mean? Sheina the Moimed Al Seiv Daita Shal Rabbi V'chachmas Mishnasai Ad Arbaim Shana. A person does not really fully appreciate the depth of his teacher's understanding and his teachings until after 40 years. So too here with the Yidden and the Eibishter. The Eibishter is not particular with Yidden until today. Now after 40 years, Yakbid, the Eibishter will be very particular because he expects more from you. And therefore the Eibishter is warning you, now there's higher expectations, you should keep this bris of Torah. That's the second shot Rashi brings here. But the Rebbe really has a question here. Why does Rashi wait 3 psukim to bring a second pshat on V'leinos Nashem Lechem Leiv Ladas? Why didn't Rashi bring this second pshat over there earlier when Rashi says the first pshat on the pasuk itself? Beis, another question here is Yidu Asher Kasher Rashi Mefarish Beis Pirushim B'Kosev Echad. Anytime Rashi says 2 pshatim, Harei Zemitam Shebekol Echad Mem Yesh Kaishi Sheine B'Chavere. There's always a question in one pshat that you don't have in the other, and therefore Rashi has to bring 2 pshatim. El Shaharisha Inu Ikke V'Karav Yisel L'Pshuta Shel Mikra. The first pshat is always the one that's closer to the pshat, and therefore it's brought first. So benidin didan right here, the pirish v'leinasan ladas ma'u kaishi b'chol pirish ma'ashnayim. What's the question that Rashi has in each one of these explanations? And how is the first pshat of Rashi better and closer to simple pshat than the second pshat of Rashi? Gimel, another question here is B'shnei HaPirushim Shebedibur HaMaschel. In both of the pshatim that Rashi brings over here in this Rashi, But Tavoyu, b'divra maschil v'Tavoyu, Messiah Rashi, b'divrei HaKosov sheb'siyam HaParsha, ushmartem es divrei habris. So it concludes with the words, ushmartem es divrei habris. Ella, and the same thing also the second time. When Rashi brings the second shot, Rashi also concludes with the words, ushmartem es divrei habris. Ella sheb'pirish hasheni meisiv v'goymer. In the second shot, Rashi adds the word v'goymer. Mao tamashini. What's the reason for this v'goymer? See how precise in the Rebbe's view every single word in Rashi is. Once there's no v'goymer, and once there is a v'goymer. So what's the difference? So we have many, many questions over here on 3 different Rashis, and the Rebbe will now explain over here the theme and the flow of all of these psukim in the end of Parshas Kisavai. Let's see. So the explanation over here is as follows. Tachlis hamachuvim b'divrei parsha zu. The point and the purpose of what's being said in this parsha, bo mefurish b'siyuma, is clear and spelled out at the end. Ushmartem es divrei habris hazois v'asisem moisam leman taskilu es kol hashatason. Moshe Rabbeinu is warning Yidden to fulfill Torah mitzvahs, to keep the bris, and to be wise and fulfill all the mitzvahs. Hainu shem divrei techacha v'azara kedei lechazik es bnei Yisrael b'shmiras haTorah v'mitzvahs. These are words of Moshe Rabbeinu warning Yidden, encouraging Yidden to do Torah mitzvahs. That's the theme of the parsha in general terms. So now, we find before this in Torah, especially in Chumash Dvarim, that Moshe Rabbeinu has already rebuked Yidden and encouraged Yidden and so on, and warned Yidden many times. And nevertheless, Kan Makdim, here the Torah gives this introduction and says, Vayikra Moshe kol Yisrael vayomer aleim. Moshe Rabbeinu calls all the Yidden again, and he has a message to tell them. And he begins talking about what happened when they came out of Mitzrayim. So now the question is, what's really going on over here? What changed over here? All of a sudden you have Moshe Rabbeinu is calling Yidden again to talk to them about what happened from Yitzias Mitzrayim for 40 years before. What's new about this? So we must say, there has to be some great chiddush over here with this musar and with this message that Moshe Rabbeinu is telling them that is not until now. Everything Moshe Rabbeinu said in Parshas Dvarim, Vaschanan or Ekev, whatever was said before, there's something brand new over here in Vayikra. So that's the question. What exactly is new over here? What's going on? Especially if you look at the first few psukim, where it just talks about what happened when Yidden came out of Mitzrayim. So it's this general question that Rashi is coming to answer. This is the foundation of what's going on over here. Rashi is going to show us what's the new message that Moshe Rabbeinu is telling the Yidden. Rashi maitikis atevis v'leinosna Hashem lachem leiva das. So Rashi brings these words from the psukim v'leinosna Hashem lachem, and with leiva das as well. Shalachayre einam muvanim klal b'pshuta shel mikra. And here Rashi is answering a very simple and basic question in the pshat of these words. How is it possible to say that Yidden didn't have the understanding and the appreciation for the miracles that the Eibishter did for them? It says clearly in the psukim that the Yidden definitely appreciated all the miracles, and the Yidden thanked the Eibishter for them as well. They believed in Hashem, they sang the Shira. When it came to celebrate Pesach, the second year, and they wanted to thank the Eibishter, and there were a few individuals that couldn't, they complained. They also wanted to join in thanking the Eibishter and bringing the carbon Pesach. So the Yidden definitely appreciated and thanked the Eibishter for the miracles. So how could the Pasuk say that Hashem has not given you a leiv ladas? So Rashi is not simply explaining the 2 words of leiv ladas, what that entails, but Rashi is explaining, B'chlal, how is it possible to say v'lenosna Hashem lachem leiv ladas? It's not true. The Yidden thanked the Eibishter. So that's why Rashi brings all of these words from the pasuk before he explains his pshat. L'chein mefarish Rashi. So therefore Rashi explains lahakir es chazdei HaKadosh Baruch Hu, that you didn't have the recognition of the Eibishter's kindness, the chasadim. Lahadgish, what Rashi is emphasizing with this is ashazeshal lenasan ladas. This that you didn't have the recognition. It doesn't refer to what is mentioned before, the Yidden coming out of Mitzrayim and the great miracles that happened then. it goes on what it's going to say afterwards. And these are miracles. They were also miraculous, but what the pasuk is mainly referring to is the 40 years, the time period Yidden were in the Midbar where they had the man and they had their clothing that was always cleaned and washed for them through the Anania covered. That is what we're referring to. That it's this experience of the 40 years of the Eibishter's Chasadim that the Yidden did not recognize. So the Rabbi explains on a little bit of the deeper level here the difference between a Nes and Chesed, the two terminologies. The Torah speaks before about the term Nes, but Rashi says that V'leinas Nashem Lechem Lev Ladas refers to the Chesed of the Eibishter throughout 40 years. So Va'abir the Pshat is as follows: Nes hu me'ura hayotzim midarki ateva. A miracle means that it's something that's unusual, out of the nature. L'mayla min ateva v'aragel, different than what you're used to, what the nature is. When you have a miraculous behavior that's happening for a long period of time and you become accustomed to it, so a person doesn't treat it as a miracle. It becomes the new normal. That's nature. Just like any habit becomes second nature, so the way the Eibusher treats Yidden for 40 years in the Midbar became the new normal. This situation with Yidden in the Midbar was for 40 years. The Yidden saw that it's the Eibusher's kindness, all of their needs are taken care of them, for them. But the miracle aspect of it, that it's something that's different and unusual, that the Yidden didn't sense for the 40 years. So therefore, Rashi, when he says Chazdei HaKadosh Baruch Hu, is telling you that the pasuk here is not referring to the miracles that happened, the great miracles of Kriyas Yamsuf and Yetzias Mitzrayim, but it's referring to the 40 years that the Yidden had, this ongoing treatment of the Eibishter in this way, and therefore the Yidden saw it as chasadim, but not as miracles. If Rashi, and not Rashi says, so the Yidden didn't appreciate this chesed of the Eibishter, and Rashi says, V'li davik boy, and to attach and to connect to the Eibishter. So Rashi is explaining what's the point here, what's the new message that Moshe Rabbeinu was saying with this Musar that he's telling them. If you really recognize the chesed of the Eibishter, the automatic result should be that dveikus, you should become one with the Eibishter. Why is that? So the Rebbe explains, Nes, if you experience a miracle, Payil, what does that cause? Yira, that a person, it's a tremendous awe and a very auspicious occasion or something unusual that happens. So it brings about Yira Pshuta, whether a basic level of Yira or Yira Saraimus, or seeing how great the Eibishter is, or Amunah, Shukal Yachel, it strengthens your Amunah to see how powerful the Eibishter is, or anything similar. But if you're talking about a kindness of the Eibishter, Hashpa, Kirov, Ava, the Eibishter is giving you, there's a closeness, there's a love, Payil Kirov, that doesn't bring about awe, that brings about closeness. And if you're talking about great miracles, great chasadim of the Eibishter, the kindness of the Eibishter, and it's constant, Kirov Gadol b'Yaiser, so this is a very big expression of closeness of the Eibishter, dveikus. So this should bring about a dveikus, that you become close to the extent that you become one with the Eibishter. So this is the automatic result of recognizing the greatness of the Eibishter that Moshe Rabbeinu was demanding of Yidden, that if you really do understand what's going on over here, then you appreciate for the 40 years that the Eibishter gave you the man and everything else you needed in the Midbar, so this should automatically bring about naturally a dveikus, to be one with the Eibishter. So until today, you did not recognize the kindness of the Eibishter. So you're also lacking in the dveikus, in the oneness with the Eibishter. So and therefore you didn't have to be warned, that you should keep the Torah mitzvahs. Just like over here, the Yidden did not recognize the greatness of the Eibishter and the kindness of the Eibishter and the dveikus that you would come automatically was not there. So Moshe Rabbeinu was telling them, until today you didn't recognize the greatness of the Eibishter, and this is part of Moshe Rabbeinu's message of why he's warning them that they should keep the Eibishter's bris. But now, according to this pshat, the Rebbe continues. The that the Yidden did not recognize the Eibish's chesed and they didn't have that dveikus. So now we can't say that means that including today, they still don't have that level of dveikus. That they still don't recognize and they still didn't have dveikus. It already says earlier, when Moshe Rabbeinu speaks to Yidden, until today they didn't recognize, but today they had dveikus. It says v'atem adveikim. So this message Moshe Rabbeinu is saying that you did not recognize the greatness of the Eibishter means until today. But it can't be including today as well. That's why Rashi says that it's v'loyad b'chlal, it doesn't include today. Okay, now the Rebbe here says, although this raya from the pasuk v'atem adveikim, that now they do experience dveikus, is not necessarily a conclusive raya. After b'deichik yeshloima, we could squeeze and say, she'afal pi, she'aloshem ba'kosav hu adveikim stam, it says before dveikim. And dveikim means the highest level of dveikus, it doesn't qualify the dveikus. But still we can say that that expression of dveikus there is related to what it says before. Because it says ve'atem, so it's a continuation to before. And what did it say before? It talks about following Avodah Zarah, Baal Pa'or. And then it says ve'atem adveikim, but you behepich mizem and akotza lakotza, the Yidden are on the other extreme. One, loy halach goyim, they don't follow Baal Pa'or, and two, holchem achrei avay lekechem, you follow the Eibishter, and three, you say to mizud dveikim b'avay lekechem. You're one, you connect to the Eibishter. So the dveikim is just a contrast to serving Avodah Zarah, but it doesn't necessarily mean that the expression of dveikim here is a high level of dveikus that's related to the theme we're talking about here, which is a dveikus when you're makkeh, when you recognize Chazdei HaKadosh Baruch Hu. V'adayin, ein nichlal b'zeh kiyum mitzvahs v'chulu. This dveikus here, not following Avodah Zarah and following the Eibishter, is not yet talking about a level of dveikus related to fulfilling mitzvahs. And actually here the Rebbe shows us that there's various different levels in dveikus, and we had this on a sikha before in Parshas Re'eh, where the Rebbe spoke about different dargas in dveikus, and the Rebbe brings it up the kitzur over here again. You have dargas aludavka boy, you have the level of aludavka boy, which Rashi speaks about earlier. Hadbek b'talmidim u'b'chachamim u'malen ya'alecha ki'ilu nidbakta boy, when you connect to talmidim and chachamim as if you're connecting to the Eibishter himself, v'chulu. And then we have the dveikus that Rashi mentions right here, when you recognize great kindness of the Eibishter, similar to the concept of bikurim, where you bring bikurim and you're recognizing and appreciating what the Eibishter gave you. And they have another level of dveikus. Is the highest level of dveikus. Which follows after everything the pasuk Vir says in Parshas Re'eh, and then it says, so that's a very high level of dveikus. So what we see here is there are many different levels of dveikus. So the fact that it says in Parshas V'aschanan v'atem adveikim that today Yidden do experience dveikus is not necessarily a raya that at this point the Yidden already were makeh chazdei HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and therefore as a result they experienced dveikus. Not necessarily. Maybe that's a lower level of dveikus that's only in contrast to serving Avodah Zarah. But over here we're talking about a level of dveikus which is connected to the fact that Yidden are being makeh in the Eibishter's chasadim. However, the Rebbe does not accept this. The Rebbe says, b'doichik, you could say so. But the fact is, it does say, hadveikim in Parshas V'aschanan stam. So therefore, dveikim stam means that the Yidden did reach the highest level of dveikus, at least the level of dveikus we're speaking about over here, of recognizing the Eibishter's chasadim, and therefore having a dveikus as a result. So therefore, at this point, what are we talking about? A level of dveikus that the Yidden already did experience. So therefore, ad hayom hazeh means until today, not including today. So therefore Rashi explains, shekavanas hakosav hi, so that what the pasuk here is saying is, adarabah, hayom hazeh his chilu la'akaras chazdei HaKadosh Baruch Hu, that today the Yidden did begin recognizing the greatness of the Eibishter. But if that's what happened, something changed today. That today Moshe Rabbeinu saw an indication that now you didn't recognize the greatness of the Eibishter, and they had dveikos. What changed? What new did Moshe Rabbeinu see in Klal Yisrael that was different than before, that until this point they did not recognize the greatness of the Eibishter? Chen mefarish Rashi, so therefore Rashi says, Shamaiti she'oisei hayayim v'chulu. I heard that on that day, as Rashi explains, the Torah was given to Bnei Levi, and the Yidden wanted to get the Torah as well. And the Rebbe explains exactly what happened over here, that this is an indication that Yidden were on a level of Dveikus. So here the Rebbe will explain the pshat of where you see the dveikus of the Yidden in this complaint that they had when the Bnei Levi got the Torah. And we will answer all of the questions that we had on this Rashi that we asked before on Siv Beis. So now, let's see what happened here. The fact that Moshe Rabbeinu writes a Torah and gives it only to the Bnei Levi and not to the rest of the Yidden is very understood. Bnei Levi nivdalu mikol Yisrael l'sharas b'kodesh. This is the Shevet separated from the rest of Yidden to serve in the Beis Hamikdash. Nemar, and the pasuk said lahem, it says to them, sh'layilem chelik v'nachla b'aretz. They don't have a portion in Eretz Yisrael. V'hem l'gyoynei shel melech HaKadosh Baruch Hu v'chulu. They are the army of the Eibusher to serve the Eibusher. No, none of their own occupation. U'lechein heim ligyoyn sheyagar al kiyum teirasei. They are the army to make sure that the Yidden will fulfill Torah. And they're going to be the ones teaching the Yidden Torah as well. So it's very understood why Moshe Rabbeinu gives Shevet Levi the Torah. And it's clear in the psukim that Rashi over here is hinting to that Moshe Rabbeinu gives the Sefer Torah to who? To the Leviim, the ones that carry the Aron of the Eibishter. So all of this is understood. They're the ones that carry the Aron. They're the ones that serve in the Beis Hamikdash. You have no portion in Eretz Yisrael. They're going to be teaching the Yidden the Torah, so they get the Torah. Moshe Rabbeinu writes for a Torah for them. But v'ataynehi, the complaint of Yidden is rak ma'atom mashlit es b'nei shiftecha aleha chulu. Why are you placing your shevet in control of it, of the Torah? Which means, hey nemes shebnei Levi hey ma'melamdim es haTorah l'bnei Yisrael. Yes, they were appointed and they're designated to be the ones to teach Yidden Torah. Or bezeh sheltem hey ma'bnei Yisrael. In that sense, they have rulership over the Yidden. They're the teachers. Avoma tomashlit oleo ala Torah. But why are you writing a special Torah for them and placing the Leviim in control of the Torah itself? They're the teachers. They're designated to work in the Beis Hamikdash. Fine. But by writing a special Torah for them, you're putting them in control of the Torah itself. And what's the concern that the Yidden have? And the concern that Yidden have as a result of this is, the Leviim are going to come, and in a day tomorrow, they're going to say to us the following thing. And the Rebbe here emphasizes the word machar, that this is in a day tomorrow, which means right now Bnei Levi won't have this taina, but in a day tomorrow they're going to have this taina. What does it mean, a day tomorrow? La'achar shenikonis la'aretz v'naschel b'chalukas ha'chelik v'anachla la'achres b'avedes adama v'chulu. The machar means once they enter into Eretz Yisrael, they're going to divide the land, and each one is going to have his place, and he's going to work in the field. Oh, Bnei Levi, now Bnei Levi is going to say, take a look at what's going on over here. Take a look, you're in the land and you're busy. You're busy working in the field, so the Torah wasn't given to you. Which means as follows. Yes, you still have a connection to the Torah, and not only that, you're still obligated to fulfill Torah mitzvahs. It wasn't fully given to you to be able to be busy with the Torah all the time. You don't have control, you don't have the time in your hands to be able to learn Torah all the time. The Torah was given to us, and we have the control of the Torah all the time. So this is proof to the fact that the Torah was given to us. So the Rabbi here answered the diyukim, very bekitzer here, but the Rabbi answered the diyukim why it says mashlit. The concern of Yidden is not that the Bnei Levi are going to say that the Torah does not belong to Yidden at all, and the Torah was taken away from them. No, the Torah belongs to all Yidden, and they're obligated to fulfill Torah mitzvahs. But who has the shlita? Who has all the time in their hands to be dedicated to the Torah fully? Only the Bnei Levi. The Bnei Levi are going to turn to the Yidden and say, look, your schedule doesn't allow it now. You have to work in the field. And this also explains why Rashi first says that the Bnei Levi are going to say, Loi lochem nitna. and then afterwards Lanu Nitna. Because the Bnei Levi's Taina is going to be based not only on the fact that today Moshe Rabbeinu is giving them the Torah, but also a Taina that comes up Machar, looking at the schedule of the Yidden then. They're going to see that the Yidden are working in the fields, and that's going to be the basis for them to say, look, you're working now in the fields, and therefore you don't have enough time to dedicate yourself fully to Torah like us. So this now explains why Moshe Rabbeinu gave us the Torah many years ago, in order to say that the Torah belongs to us, and we are the ones that are to be fully dedicated to Torah all the time. So this was really the complaint of Yidden. What they were essentially saying is that we're going to enter into Eretz Yisrael, and the situation is going to change. We're not going to be able to be fully dedicated to the Torah the way we were here in the Midbar. And this is going to be a legitimate Taina that the Levium are going to say to us. And now the Yidden continue and explain and say that we have an answer to this. This is not true. We want to continue having the same dedication to Torah even later. We also stood at Har Sinai. When does that begin? That begins at Rosh Chodesh Sivan. And then when the Yidden accepted and they said, Nasa, we will fulfill. When the Eibishter says, will you accept the Torah? And the Yidden says, yes. And we accepted the Torah. And only afterwards does Rashi say, in other words, the point over here is, we're not just talking about the fact that the Eibishter gave Torah to Klal Yisrael. Of course the Eibishter gave Torah to Klal Yisrael, and that was never the Yidden's concern. The Yidden never said that the Bnei Levi are going to fully take away the Torah from us. They say, yeah, you're mechuyev in Torah mitzvahs, but you can't be as dedicated to the Torah as fully as we are because we don't have to work in the fields. So the response of Yidden is not just the very fact that we got the Torah. Yeah, we got the Torah, but the response of the Yidden is, no, even before we got the Torah, we stood there, we were dedicated, we accepted it. When the Eibishter asked, will you fulfill it? We said, yes, we accept it. And then the Eibishter gave us the Torah. But the main thing the Yidden were focusing on is the fact that they accepted it willingly. And they dedicated themselves fully to the Torah. And therefore we want to continue that dedication even after we enter into Eretz Yisrael. So why are you giving the Sefer Torah only to your Shevet, to Bnei Levi? Okay, Sheshama, Moshe Dvarim Elu. When Moshe Rabbeinu hears this, Samach. This made Moshe Rabbeinu very happy, hearing the Yidden's demand. Omar, he said, Ayayim Azeh, Vanti Shatem Dveikim, V'chafeitzim B'mokim. The Yidden desire to be one with the Eibishter. Not only did they thank the Eibishter for miracles, that was Yitzias Mitzrayim or Kriyas Yamsov Canal. This is an indication that Yidden are really appreciating the Eibishter's chasadim. The Yidden are becoming much closer and one with the Eibishter. And because of that dveikus, it's the reason that they're demanding to continue that dveikus even when they want to go into Eretz Yisrael, and their schedule is not going to allow for a full dedication. So it's this, what happened at Yom Hazeh, this is the indication that the Yidden achieved the level of Dveikus. And the Yidden must have recognized the Chasadim of the Eibishter and had this Dveikus, and therefore they had that demand that they want to continue that Dveikus even when they go into Eretz Yisrael. That's what Rashi is saying over here. So the point there is that Moshe Rabbeinu was talking to Yidden and he's telling them it took you many, many years to come to this recognition of Dveikus. Finally today you came to this level where I see the Dveikus that you have. Now, Rashi continues and explains there's something else that takes place now. There's something else that happens over here at this time, or at this place, where Moshe Rabbeinu is going to explain why he's concerned and why he's warning them that they have to be careful of what's going to happen in the future. You arrived at this place, as the Rebbe quoted Rashi before, and the Rebbe will explain it now. So what's Rashi coming to address? The basic question the Rebbe had is, what's Rashi answering here? These words are completely extra. If you look into the psukim, it just seems like the pasuk is continuing to talk about miracles that Yidden experienced. The victory over Sichen and Oig, which the pasuk says immediately after this. Why is the pasuk saying these words? And you arrive to this place. Just say the miracle that happened. What is it? So these words are simply extra in the pasuk. That's what Rashi is coming to address. Rashi, the kavanas hakosov. So from this, Rashi proves that the point here in the pasuk, this is not another detail of miracles that happened to Yidden. Moshe Rabbeinu is saying now a new point. This is going to explain Why Moshe Rabbeinu has to warn Yidden right here now that they should remain connected and one with the Eibishter. Adata, until today, Yidden were dependent on the Eibishter's kindness every day. They never had leftovers from the month from one day to the next. So there's not that much of a concern that they will rebel against the Eibishter. Once you arrive to this place, now you're at the end of this time period being in the Midbar, and you're going to enter into Eretz Yisrael. Now there is no man. So now the Yidden are going to be working on their own. Here you see yourself. You already begin to see yourself with greatness and honor. So here there's a concern that with time, so now the Eibish's miracles will not, and the kindness of the Eibish will not be there constantly, and the Yidden are going to be busy on their own, working for their own parnasa, to gather their produce from the field. You may rebel, you may become haughty and high in your hearts to rebel against the Eibishter. As it says already in Parshas Ekev, when you work on your own, so then you end up attributing whatever you do to yourself, your own accomplishments. That's the concern that Moshe Rabbeinu has now. So on one hand, Moshe Rabbeinu sees Yidden at the end of the 40 years being in a very high level, at the peak. After the whole experience of 40 years, finally Yidden came to Dveikus. They came to a very strong connection to Hashem, as it was indicated by the fact that they demanded that they want to have the title like Bnei Levi. At the same time, though, Moshe Rabbeinu tells the Yidden, but you've now arrived to a place where there's a new situation beginning. And this itself brings you to see yourself, the greatness and honor that you yourself have. Now you're outside of Eretz Yisrael, and that itself may cause you to rebel against the Eibishter. And therefore Moshe Rabbeinu warns them about the future. And the Rebbe will spell out more in the next sif of exactly what happened in this Mokim Hazeh, that not only besides the fact that they were right outside Eretz Yisrael, and there's this transition that they're going to change into entering into nature, but what exactly happened at this place that Moshe Rabbeinu has a basis to be concerned and say that there's something changing here. Rashi. But now the Rebbe explains that Rashi is very precise, and he says, Gedula v'choved, that you see in yourself greatness and honor. This explains why there's really a concern over here that the Yidden their hearts might go out of control. Greatness is the way a person views himself. You consider yourself to be important. Kavod is the honor that you get from someone else. So therefore the pasuk uses here a double expression that there's greatness and there's honor. It's not only your attitude and the way you view yourself, that you view yourself in greatness. That's something that may not continue later. Once they come to Eretz Yisrael and they'll be amongst other nations, they may not view themselves in that way. Yidden are in a minority amongst nations. So that necessarily wouldn't be such a great concern that this will be a greatness that will cause the Yidden to rebel against Hashem. They actually got honor from nations around. And that's another reason and the basis of why Moshe Rabbeinu is concerned that in the future the Yidden may come to rebel against the Eibush. So that's why Rashi says both terms, Gedula and Kavod. So the Torah says these words, they're not extra words. It's a new inyan, it's a new point. When you come right here, and now there's the transition from being in the midbar with the Eibish's chasadim constantly, going into the Eretz Yisrael where you have the nature that's going to take over. Here, Moshe Rabbeinu has to warn them that even then, when you're going to be working in nature, you should still continue keeping Torah and mitzvahs. So this is really what's going on over here. As the Rebbe began, there's a Vayikra Moshe. Moshe calls and summons the Yidden, and he has a special message to tell them. That you're here right now after 40 years, and you're at the peak, at the height of your connection to the Eibishter, a special dveikus, as Moshe Rabbeinu saw in the Yidden then. But at the same time, though, you're transitioning into a different place, and you already began, you're right outside Eretz Yisrael, and Moshe Rabbeinu is concerned about the future. That's the message here. So now the Rebbe will spell out and explain more what happened over here at Mokim Hazeh. What happens over here at this place? Aval kosher. So there's a question here. When Yidden arrived to this place, when the Torah says they arrived there, what does the Torah say? What happened? The Torah says, what happened at that place? The story with Sichen and Oig. Sippen Nes, it's a miracle, the Gam Chesed and a kindness, Shir Lebnei Yisrael. And this seems to be just a continuation of the miracles that the Torah speaks about before. So why are we making this interruption of making the point that there's a transition here? You came to a place outside Eretz Yisrael, and Moshe Rabbeinu is concerned about this transition. Why does that say right here? That we finished a time period of 40 years, and we begin now a new time period of entering into Eretz Yisrael. And then the Torah continues to talk about the miracle of Sichen v'Oig, which seems to be the conclusion of this time period of 40 years in the Midbar. So there's something over here that's not understood. So the Rebbe explains here that when the Torah talks about the story of Sichen v'Oig, this is already the beginning of the new time period that Moshe Rabbeinu sees that happened today. It's not a continuation of speaking about the miracles that happened to the Yidden for 40 years in the Midbar. So the pshat here is as follows. According to this pshat of Rashi, hakavana kan ba'asipu de melchemes Sichen v'Oig, when the Torah says the story of Sichen and Oig, the Torah is not talking about the miracle that happened in this. On the contrary, this is something that Yidden will see in themselves, and they'll see themselves as great and as honorable. Sorry. Kibush, Eretz, Sichen v'Oig, Shoysa kehemshach hakasav lenachla l'Ruveni goyme. For the first time, Yidden are conquering a territory, and they're settling it. Shevet Ruven, God, and half of Shevet Menashe is settling a territory. That's the theme of the pasuk over here. That this is finally the first time Yidden are conquering a certain territory, and then Yidden will attribute this to themselves, and they'll see themselves with greatness and honor that they now own a territory. So if that's the theme over here, we can see it now. The Rebbe says, take a look in the words of the pasuk, you'll see. Look at the difference, the way the story of Sichen v'Oig is said earlier in Torah and Parshas Devarim, and the way it's written in Nach, and the way it's written right over here in this week's Parsha. Sham over there, and the Rebbe quotes from a pasuk in Nach, where it medayik krav vayitneu Hashem Elokeinu lefaneinu v'nach ha'isegayme v'yitn Hashem Elokeinu b'yadeinu v'nakeyu, that it's the Eibishter, emphasizing that it's a miracle that the Eibishter performed. But Goshesh anitzach noy meis Hashem, that it's a victory from the Eibishter. V'ilu kan kosav kra, what does the Torah here say? V'nakem v'nikach, and we fought him back, and we took the territory. Mibila haskish meis Hashem meis zayis, not mentioning that it came from the Eibishter. Kanal, this is exactly the point here. Kan kavanas hakasav lahadgish ha'av shoriyis shebnei Yisrael yiru atzmam begdula v'chaved keichi v'aitzim yadi v'nakim goyim. Here the Torah is saying Moshe Rabbeinu sees already this transitioning into a territory begins already at this point, because they yash in a certain territory, and they can attribute it to themselves that it's ours. We accomplished this. We drove them out, and we settled this territory. So this is the Tavo Adam Mokim Hazeh. The story of Sichen v'Oig is not to talk about a miracle that happened, but it's to say that you didn't conquer this territory, and this is the transition that Moshe Rabbeinu is concerned of and is warning them that they should continue with their dveikus to the Eibishter even after they enter into Eretz Yisrael. Yeah, so this is the conclusion of the first pshat, explaining what Moshe Rabbeinu's message to the Yidden was, what the theme over here was. Now the Rebbe will point out some questions that there are in the first pshat, which is of course the reason why Rashi has to bring a second pshat. So Vadai and Kasha. But we have the following questions. Aleph number 1. V'pirish v'leinosna Hashem lachem lev ladas. Hashem hasn't given you the heart to recognize. Lahakir as chazdei HaKadosh Baruch, as Rashi said, you haven't recognized the Eibishter's kindness. Since the pasuk uses the term Hashem hasn't given you this recognition, mashma sha'ikuv b'zeh hoya lo mitzad bnei Yisrael elo mitzad HaKadosh Baruch, that what prevented Yidden to recognize is from above, from the Eibishter, not mitzad Yidden. And according to the pshat Rashi saying here is that because it became something that was a habit every day, they had the man and the clothing every day, so the Yidden didn't recognize. But it's mashma that it's some leinosan. There was something unique here that the Eibishter prevents this. What does that mean? What would that mean according to the first pshat? Beis, another question. Bepirish ad hayom hazeh. Going back to these words of ad hayom hazeh, until today. Today the Yidden did recognize. On this day, Moshe Rabbeinu had an indication that the Yidden recognized, because when he gave the Torah to Bnei Levi, the Yidden demanded it as well. So the Rebbe says there's two questions here. Aleph, lefizeh pirish ad u'v'lo yad b'chlal deloike b'chol makom. As we already mentioned before, so the meaning of ad hayom hazeh is different than usual. Ad always means including today. Over here it's v'lo yad b'chlal. It does not include today. So that's one difficulty. Beis, lefizeh vayitna asef Torah lakaynim shebeparshas vayelech. The story that the Torah speaks about in Parshas Vayelech, that Moshe Rabbeinu gave the kainim the Sefer Torah, ira kaidim lanam beparshasena vaydav Moshe Goyma yem azani yesalam. It happened before what's written in this week's parsha, that today you've become a nation. So the Torah is written out of order. That's what we're going to have to say, because that's the indication Moshe had of their dveikus, is that the demand that Yidden had. So that's another difficulty. Torah is out of order. Gimel, third difficulty here is vatavoyu ala makom hazeh. So what does Rashi say? Atem roim es atzmechem begdula. So now you see yourself in greatness. So the question is, im kavanas hakosav laharis al shini b'matzavim b'boim l'makom yishuv aschalas and hagetivis. If the whole point over here is that now the Yidden are already experiencing conquering a territory and living in the nature of the land, and therefore there's a concern that they're going to rebel. Why are we at all mentioning the victory over Sichon and Oig, which was an open miracle? As already mentioned clearly before in the Torah. You came to this place which is a makom yishuv, a settled land, and you conquered the territory. So true, the Rebbe explained before that you could see in the pasuk it says vanakim, vanikach, but the Rebbe says according to this pshat, why are we at all talking about the victory over Sichon and Oig? If the whole point is just to say that the Yidden came to a point where they begin to conquer a territory, and therefore there's a concern that they're entering into Teva, so that's all it should say. You arrive to a place, you conquer a territory, and therefore I warn you to be careful with the dveikus like you had it in the Midbar. Why is it at all mentioning Sichon and Oig, which immediately tells you that we're talking about a miracle, as it already said clearly before in the Torah? So these are the questions that Rashi has on the first pshat. So therefore, after we learn Vatavayu and we see how the first pshat of Rashi unfolds in all these psukim here, until here. So we have these questions on how the flow of the psukim work over here in the first pshat of Rashi. So therefore, tzarech loima, here's where Rashi brings up the second pshat. Rashi waited first to explain the first pshat through all the psukim, and then you have the difficulties, including the difficulty over here in Vatavoy ala makom hazeh, and here Rashi brings the second pshat. Davar acher, the other pshat over here is as follows. A person doesn't recognize and get the depth of what his teacher is telling him until after 40 years. And a completely different pshat. Not that Moshe Rabbeinu is concerned about the future because they're transitioning from such a high dveikus into the teva of the land, and therefore Moshe Rabbeinu warns them. No, adarabah. Moshe Rabbeinu sees how great the Yidden are, that today the Eibishter gives them the ability to understand the depth and to connect to the Eibishter on such a high level. So what Moshe Rabbeinu is saying to them is, also there's high expectations. If you're on such a high level, so there's higher expectations of you now that you're going to enter into Eretz Yisrael. That's Moshe Rabbeinu's message. So this answers all the questions that we asked before. Aleph number 1, that it's the Eibishter that's giving the Yidden this recognition. This is the way the Eibishter created man. That a person does not naturally understand the depth of what's being given to him until 40 years later. So this is Hashem, it's the nature Hashem created. Beis, when it says Hayom hazeh, this day, this is part of the 40 years. And until now, until the conclusion of 40 years, they didn't have this recognition. So that the taich of ad hayom hazeh means including today, like always in Torah. Ad means and including today as well. So until today, it's not makbid. Mekan ve'elach, meaning after this. Only after this, the Eibishter will begin being particular because there's higher expectations of you. So that answers the pshat of Ad hayom hazeh. And also, Sipur the Mulchemes Sichen v'Oig, the Torah says the story of the victory over Sichen and Oig. It actually is a continuation to what it says before. It's not talking about, like according to the first pshat, the transition from being in the midbar into nature where they conquer the land. No, it's talking about the Nisim. And the message over here is there's higher expectations. You have the ability to recognize the greatness of the miracles, and therefore I'm warning you to live up to this high kaiches that Hashem is giving you and to keep the bris. Completely different message that Moshe Rabbeinu is saying according to this. That's the second pshat. But now the Rebbe points out the difficulties with the second pshat. Yod, sagt der Rebbe, al pizeh muva mashe bepirish zeh, meisif Rashi v'goymer. So now, before actually we get to the difficulties, which the Rebbe will explain in the next paragraph, first the Rebbe explains this diuk here, why, when the Rebbe brings the first pshat of Rashi, Shmartam es divrei bris hazois, that Moshe Rabbeinu is warning Yidden about the future, that they should keep the bris, he does not write the word v'goymer. But in the second pshat, Rashi brings the word v'goymer. Mashenkim bepirish harishon. So what's going on over here? Lepirish ha'alef. What's the theme of Moshe Rabbeinu's words according to the first pshat? Moshe Rabbeinu is concerned of the possibility that Eden will rebel against the Eibishter, because they'll enter into nature and they'll say Krechi vaytzim yadi and they'll rebel. All the details that are mentioned in the pasuk Shmartem are not really relevant to that main point. The main point there is keep the bris, don't rebel. So therefore Rashi doesn't say v'goymer. There is rebelling, vayivetu, and Moshe Rabbeinu is saying shmartem, keep the bris. But according to the second pshat, there's something else going on over here. Here Moshe Rabbeinu's message is that the Yidden are on a higher level, there's higher expectations, they have a greater understanding of what the Eibush is giving them, the depth, chochmas mishnosai. Achshav yakpid. Now the Eibush is going to be very particular. Over here, the details that's mentioned later in the pasuk is very relevant. And you will fulfill it. You understand what the Eibush is giving you, so you have to fulfill in a more meticulous way. And understand and see with the wisdom, the greatness of the Eibush. Because over here, the theme according to the second pshat is that the Yidden have a higher level of understanding, so there's greater expectations. So over here, Rashi says v'goymer. Here, the details that are mentioned on the pasuk fit in very well with this second pshat, that there's a higher expectation of Yidden. So this is the two pshatim over here in Rashi. So what's the difficulties with the second pshat? These words, are not answered according to the second pshat. Aleph, Tevis Elam, Yusaris Legamri, they're completely extra. The change of what happens, that now there's a higher expectation, because after 40 years they understand the greatness of the Eibishter. That didn't happen. Nothing happened today. It's after the whole time period of 40 years. So what happened now when they arrived at this place? Those words are totally extra. Either way, why are we putting these words right here? The miracles mentioned before that happened for 40 years, and the next that happens of Sichen V'Oig. There's an interruption here of these words. So these are two very strong questions. According to the second pshat, this is not addressed at all. These are totally extra words. Maybe Rashi pirish zeh rak pirish hasheni. So therefore, this is only brought as a second pshat. And the first pshat, with the difficulties that there are in them, but still it's closer to the pashat pshat. Okay, so this concludes the pshat and the Rebbe's explanation of the two pshatim and Rashi, how it fits in the flow of the psukim, the relative problems that each one of the pshatim have. And you can see over here two different approaches into what Moshe Rabbeinu was, the new message Moshe Rabbeinu was telling Yidden. Is Moshe Rabbeinu turning to Yidden and saying, I see you now in such a high level, but I'm concerned. What's going to happen in the future? Is that what it is? Or is it the opposite? That Moshe Rabbeinu says, we have higher expectations of you. I see how great you are. I see how much Hashem gives you, and there's higher expectations, and I want you to live up to those expectations. It's two different approaches, and Moshe Rabbeinu is speaking to Yidden before he passes away. Let's see al Pichsidis what the Rebbe says. Pirish Aleph, The first pshat, Mevayra Hechrech Lahakeres Chazdei Kadosh Baruch Hu Kanal, speaks about how important it is to recognize the Eibishter's kindness. Gamba Nisim Shekvar Horgula Ben Vanasa Keteva, even those things that as you are accustomed to and become part of nature. And V'dafka De Akarazu Bala L'Davik B'Kadosh Baruch Hu. This is what will bring you to become one with Hashem. Al Pizem move on, Diak Rashi. There's another Diak here that Rebbe says, Al Pichsidis we can understand. Rashi says, Chazdei HaKadosh Baruch Hu. In the pasuk it uses the Eibishter's name Yudke Vavke Havaya. But Rashi says Chazdei HaKadosh Baruch Hu. What's the difference? Havaya Meira Al Lakusi Yisbarach Shalamayla Ma'ateva Hoya Hoy V'Viyah Kecha. The Eibishter's name refers to the fact that he's above nature. Time does not exist. HaKadosh Baruch Hu Pirushay, but the term HaKadosh Baruch Hu in Chassidus it explains means as follows. HaKadosh means Masha Kadosh Muvdum and Oilimus, the fact that the Eibishter is higher than the worlds. But Baruch, Melashon Amshacha, the term Baruch, besides being blessed, means that we draw down the Eibishter, Nimshach Lamata B'Teich Oilimus. It's talking about the fact that the Eibishter functions and does things within nature. V'hainu Chazdei V'Nisi Hashem Kefi Shenimshachem B'Soichan Hagas V'Teva Olam. We're talking about the Eibishter's kindness and greatness that enters into the world. And this is where you have to recognize the Eibishter's greatness, within nature. Similar in the next parashi, what does he say? Moshe Rabbeinu says, I see an indication that you want to be one with the Eibishter, and we call the Eibishter Mokim. Moshe Rabbeinu says, I see from your demand that you recognize the greatness of the Eibishter in the space of the world. And you want to be connecting to the Eibishter even here, within the world, even here there's a dveikus. That was what Moshe Rabbeinu saw in the Yidden. And that's why he's warning them for the future that they should maintain this. When they go into Eretz Yisrael, actually being in nature, they should continue seeing this and having the same dveikus to the Eibishter. So however, as long as Yidden are in the midbar, the challenge and the test of not seeing the Eibishter's chesed isn't that great. Once you enter into Eretz Yisrael, Eretz Neshavas, settled land, Pasakaman v'chul, there's no more man. So here Yidden are occupied with nature. Here there's a much bigger possibility that Yidden will rebel. So lechein his Moshe shmartem es divrei habris hazais, that you should keep the bris, the covenant. And here the Rebbe is medayik the word bris. Although there'll be a big concealment on your connection to the Eibishter while you're in nature, your connection should be a connection of a bris. The concept of a bris is used when you want to go beyond reason and logic. When you want to make a connection that reason and logic will not stop or weaken it, so that's what a bris is all about. That's how you could break the covering and the Helen V'Hester of the world, and even after they enter into Eretz Yisrael. That's the warning of Shmartem es Abris. But the Rebbe goes a step weiter. It's not just Kabbalah style. There's more to this. The question still remains. There is the concealment of nature. On the godly revelation in the world. How could Yidden break out of this concealment and connect to godliness? So true, we explained this Kabbalah soil, that Yidden will be dedicated to Torah and mitzvahs with Kabbalah soil, but to actually connect to Elokus and to feel godliness, to be Davok, how do you break out of that Helen V'Hester? So here is the second pshat of Rashi as a continuation to the first pshat of Rashi, which is that the Eibishter is empowering Yidden. The Eibishter is saying, I've given you the recognition and the understanding to be able to continue this. At the end of the 40 years, before Yidden enter into Eretz Yisrael, the Taisav b'nei Yisrael al piteva b'ris olam ha'adam and sinis alev, according to the nature the Eibishter creates, so the Eibishter empowers Yidden sheyamdu al soif das Rabba, to see the depth of the Eibishter. And this gives an extra energy to their Aveda, to see and understand and see the Eibishter in everything that you do. To give you the depth of comprehension and godliness. The pasuk says, "Taskilu kol hashatasan, ula yashleima shetaskilu at sheyuchlo la'asig am protei mitzvahs," to see and appreciate the depth and the greatness of all the details of all the mitzvahs that you do. Va'ad, in another hint in kol is kol masach l'shem shemayim, that you should sense godliness and everything that you do should be for the Eibishter's sake. So the point, the message of the second Rashi is that there is the Kabbalah soil that we see in the first pshat of Rashi that is necessary in a case of nature and the Helen Vehester. But besides that, the Eibishter will give you the power. The Eibishter is giving you the koyach to also feel and connect, lev lodas, to be able to recognize and understand the greatness of the Eibishter even within this Helen Vehester. So this is the flow and the connection of the two pshatim of Rashi. It's two points that are very important of how to connect to the Eibishter in this time period. On one hand, there's the koyach that the Eibishter gives you to break out of the Helen Vester, and to recognize the greatness of the Eibishter. In other words, not to deal with nature with Kabbalah, but to actually break out of the Helen Vester and to recognize the greatness of the Eibishter here in nature. How is this? How the Teisvis Oyer, which is Yediyah and Chachma, by the revelation that the Eibishter gives you, Shenimshach Yisrael b'Seif HaMem Shana Shaz Omnal Seif Daita v'Chachmas Mishnasai. The Eibishter empowers Yidden to break out of the nature, to break out of the Helen Vester. That's on one hand. But on the other hand, though, that's not enough. In order that this should be the way it should, the way it's expected, you have to have the foundation of Kabbalah soil, which is emphasized in the first pshat of Rashi. To keep the bris, as the Rebbe said, bris means Kabbalah soil. Even when you'll be in a situation where the Helen Vahesta will be very strong, and you didn't break out of it, and there's a concern that you're going to rebel, because of mitzat Kabbalah's oil, but the Kabbalah's oil that a Yid has, that keeps you beyond reason and logic to keep the bris, to keep the Kabbalah's oil, no matter what the situation is. So the point over here is, it's a blend of both of these things. There has to be the foundation, the solid foundation of Kabbalah's oil. Regardless of what happens, you shouldn't budge from your connection to the Eibishter. But at the same time, the Eibishter also empowers you to break out of the Halam Vasta, to be able to appreciate and see Gilui Elokus even in nature. That's the flow of the two Pirushim of Rashi. The Rebbe brings up another theme over here, another inyan that we could see from Rashi. Oid inyan b'yenish al Teira, another point of Chassidus that we could see in this Rashi. The Pirushi al Teira kais of Rashi, Rashi's language here is ein adam moment al seif daite v'chochmas mishnasai. A person does not fully understand the depth of the das and the chochma of the teachings of his teacher. V'ile b'Pirushi al Ashas kaisev seif daite utvunasai. Rashi adds the word tvunasai. So v'tzarech lav and tamashini. What's the change? The Gamma Rem is because of the Chol Pratim Eila. Where we see in the Pasuk these details, whether it's Das, Chochme, Tvuna. So the Rebbe explains, Va'abir b'zeh. Leiv lo das, einayim lirois, vaznayim l'shmoya. There are three things mentioned in the Pasuk. Heim agimul moichen Chochme bin das. Those are the three details of Chochme bin das. Lirois, moicha Chochme. Chochme is seeing. Shein yonah riyas ein aseichel. When a person sees a flash, a point, not the details, but he sees that opening, that discovery of Chachma. That's Lirais. L'shmoya maya chabina. Concept of hearing refers to the bina, where you take apart the details. Shmiya malashon havana. You hear, you understand, you dissect, you get all the particular details. That's when you hear something. And ladas, of course, is maya chadas, and then das, as it's explained in Chassidus, B'frat and Tanya Pei Gimel, what das is about. You take it, you apply it, you connect. That's maya chadas. Ukeneged zeh kaisev Rashi b'Pirushi al Teira soiv daitoi v'chochmas mishnasai. Soiv daitoi is das. Chochmas is chochma. And mishnasai, when you learn something, limud b'havana is bina. So Rashi in his Pirush al Teira is hinting to all three details here that the Pasuk says. Umedayik Rashi soiv daitoi. But there's another diak here. Rashi says the end, or like the purpose, the point, or the depth of his das. What's the end? What's the purpose of all of this comprehension of the greatness of that now you can understand? That it should lead to action. That it should change your behavior. That's why Rashi uses the term seif daita, which means hasagat shabal seif, a comprehension and applying it, that it actually hits the spot, that you actually change your behavior. Having a conclusion that leads to action. That's the pshat of seif daita. This is all Rashi ala Teira. Ulam b'pirushei ala shas kaisav rak tvunasai v'lechachmas mishnasai. Here Rashi says tvunasai, that the Eibishter hasn't given you tvunasai, and Rashi skips chachma. Why? The Gemara, Mefarsh Nakas of Gama Moshe Rabbeinu. You look in the Gemara, it speaks about this pasuk also referring to Moshe Rabbeinu himself. Shegam hu loy kam adaita d'Rabbi ad mem shana. That he also didn't have this kind of appreciation of the Eibush until after 40 years. V'lo yitachan loymar. And regarding Moshe, you cannot say she'ad az lo nitna la Moshe chachma. That until that point Moshe Rabbeinu did not have the level of chachma. Sharei madregis Moshe Rabbeinu hu sviras ha-chachma. Moshe Rabbeinu is the personifies Sfiras HaChachma. That's what he represents. As it's explained elsewhere, the Rebbe explains by Arichas, Moshe Rabbeinu is Chachma. L'chein kaisav Rashi. So therefore Rashi says that the level that Moshe Rabbeinu attained after 40 years was only regarding Seif Daitoi Tfunasa, which is Bin and Das, but not regarding Chachma. That's a level that Moshe Rabbeinu has all the time.